Hello, after what seems to be a really long time, we are back again with ASEAN Movie Pulse Talks. I am Panos Kotzathanasis and I'm here with Tom Wilmot, Grace Han and Adriana Rosati. And today we're going to speak about the Roundup, the most recent blockbuster from Korea, which also is, I think, at least it was in the beginning. I guess it still is the most commercially successful film in Korea after COVID, because we now have this thing after and pro-COVID. So, okay, we're gonna talk about this for a moment. Tom, can you tell us a bit about what the film is about?
Yep. So in this sequel to 2017's The Outlaws, the no-nonsense beast-like detective Ma Dong-seok heads to Vietnam with his police captain to repatriate a Korean petty criminal who's turned himself into the authorities. However, it's soon revealed that the small-time crook is actually on the run from the deadly Kang Hae-sang, a vicious criminal who's wandered Southeast Asia, kidnapping and killing Korean tourists. Out of his jurisdiction and maybe even out of his depth, Detective Ma resolves to bring Kang to justice by whatever means necessary.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Okay, we're done. Okay, see you next week. Okay. Okay, so, all right, let's start with you, Grace. Since you are Korean, what did you think of the film?
Yeah, I was really excited to watch it because so many of my friends have been talking about it, and my parents are like, "Oh, this is like really popular in theaters right now." And I guess Ma Dong-seok, like everybody loves him. He's been on the rise for, I don't know, 5-10 years now. But I guess I think I saw a lot of resonances with Escape from Mogadishu. Perhaps it's because they're like shooting in an exotic locale outside of Korea, but they're employing only Korean actors, and they're saying it's a strictly Korean situation, but just displaced away from the peninsula. But at the same time, I thought, yeah, so I guess we can just start with there and then we can like unfold, because I have many more thoughts to come after that. So I thought that was very interesting.
Well, you mean that the fact that it was shot outside Korea?
Yeah, the fact that so much of it was about like this very strictly Korean diasporic situation in Vietnam, I think, or in Southeast Asia, versus shooting everything within Korea, which I think is where we find a lot of police and crime stories, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a bit okay. The film is kind of funny in its own guy's flick fashion, but I think the only real joke, which is a bit self-deprecating, is at that moment when the two policemen arrive in Vietnam, and they have a discussion with some local policemen who happen to also be Korean and speak Korean, which happens, yeah, you know. And they say, okay, the place is filled with Koreans, and so crime has really risen since the time the Koreans arrived. And this is Koreans talking about it, which I found was the most funny thing in the film, probably. But yeah, in general, it is interesting that this thing is shot in Vietnam. What did you think about that part, Tom?
I mean, I thought it was just a good setup for sort of like a fish out of water scenario for the main detective. It's just kind of taking him out of the comfort zone of his own country and his own jurisdiction. I could have actually done with him spending more time in Vietnam. That was one of the things I would have liked to have seen more of, because especially when they're talking about you don't have any sort of right to operate here as police, and there's some tension with the Vietnamese police, that kind of goes away relatively quickly. I would have liked to have seen them maybe doing some more detective work or some more police work in Vietnam. But I mean, yeah, that was kind of, as far as I looked into it, it was just a good opportunity to show him out of his comfort zone.
Adriana?
Yeah, I was saying that, I don't know, Grace, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that it's sort of not based on a real story, but based on the fact that the film is based on the fact that Vietnam is one of the most popular touristic destination for Korean people, and these things of the kidnappings and the crime is sort of true because with lots of Korean maybe rich tourists that happen for real. So maybe yeah, maybe this is a reason why they choose the setting. I have to say that in the first film, I really enjoyed that community feeling that there was because it's about like this cleanup of crime in Garibong, and in the film the policeman is actually a resident of the area, so it's got the know-how, and there is all this network of people and this community feeling. But I guess that maybe they recreated this community feeling of the Korean expat in Vietnam. It was interesting anyway, the setting.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right in bringing up that a lot of Koreans go to Vietnam. I mean, I went, I think, with my parents in 2019, 18, because there were just so many sales of Korea go to Vietnam sort of tourist trips. And I remember at the time, like, our Vietnamese Korean tour guides, Koreans who were diasporically displaced in Vietnam, they were all so shady. Like, I remember distinctly feeling like, oh wow, this feels like a very underground or seedy sort of business. You can see them like taking cash bribes or delivering cash bribes to different people left and right, and then it leaves you wondering, like, oh my God, like, am I going to be okay? But everybody in my tour bus got home safely, so I guess we were fine. But but I think you're right to point that out. Yeah, it's definitely a cultural phenomenon.
And it's also, I think, the choice was also because it gave the opportunity to use guns, which they cannot use in Korea. They can use in Vietnam. We usually see in Korean movies that only knives and, policemen actually chasing people instead of shooting them, which is that doesn't work good for movies, but okay. And please, Adriana.
Now, maybe also a tiny bit, a little occasion to critique the Vietnamese police, because in the film it's depicted in a very relaxed, even too relaxed with the crime and the Korean criminals. So maybe, I don't know if it was a way to address a reason why there is this real surge of crime in Vietnam. Just to have.
Okay. And an interesting point of the film for me, which I really thought that in this Me Too and political correctness environment would be preterite by now, but the main ingredient of the film is actually police brutality. Like the protagonist is like the embodiment of police brutality. He hits whoever gets in his way. So I don't know how you feel about it. I was a little bit, I didn't like, let's say, the part where he's interrogating the other Korean guy in the police office and he can't do anything, but he tries to pull his ear out and then he hits the desk and actually tortures him essentially for no particular reason. And I don't know, how do you feel about that, Tom?
I mean, I can't pretend to know what attitudes are like towards the police and the authorities in South Korea because I just don't have the foggiest. I thought that those bits were very clearly played for humor. Interestingly, he wasn't necessarily being shown as like the kind of badass cop that does whatever he needs to do to get it done. It was very much kind of like, this is a scumbag criminal and he didn't put up too much resistance to any of the interrogations or questionings or various techniques. But no, I mean, it's an interesting point. It was something at the very beginning of the film that I thought of, but I guess they do kind of address it a little bit with the news story that appears in the newspaper, where they've kind of taken that photo of him just after beating up a criminal out of context.
Okay. Grace?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. I think, first of all, I think it's interesting because Ma Dong-seok's character, like throughout the entire time, all of his lines tend to have like this condescending father figure sort of a tone. Like a lot of the phrases that he uses to whip these criminals into shape are things that I heard as a kid when my parents are whipping me into shape.
Oh, really?
So I think there definitely is like a parental I guess rather than thinking of it as like brutality in the same way that it is configured in the US, I think it's more like, it seemed like more of a paternalizing sort of a tone, the way that Ma Dong-seok's character had been portrayed. I also think it's interesting to like compare Ma Dong-seok's casting to all the other fairly smaller framed policemen on the force. I was watching this with my friend and they were like so shook when Ma Dong-seok stood up and they're like, oh, he's so built. So I think Ma Dong-seok's general role as like this gangster cop in Roundup 1, but also in previous movies, I think perhaps part of that spirit has carried through more than thinking about police brutality per se.
Adriana?
I missed a big part of them, but I found it was very funny that there wasn't one woman inside apart from the boss's wife, which then turned up to be a completely different person of what you expected. You expected like the frightened wife, and then she turned out to be quite different. But yeah, it was a very sort of old-fashioned male kind of story. I mean, I didn't mind it too much. The brutality of the police, well, in this kind of films is quite common. I mean, I didn't find it particularly, I don't know, shocking. I don't know, maybe it's mediated a bit by the fact that he's such a charmer, and so he's a bit of a character that looks almost like a comic book character. So you sort of allow them to do things that for real are really not on. You know, it's a fantasy world.
Okay. All right. I guess then we can say that this kind of brutality and violence can still be fun. I guess it is. I don't know. How did you find the film? Did you feel it's fun? You know, a very strong guy beating other guys all the time. I don't know.
Again, when I see these kind of films, for me are films. You know, I'm very, you know, I would never allow or things like that in reality. But I don't mind. Again, for me, it's like watching, like reading a comic books. It's a sort of comedy action. It's not really like a social real. I don't know. So maybe I don't know.
But you enjoyed the film. You were not.
Oh yeah, I enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, he punched a guy and the guy fly through the room. Through the room. Obviously, it's fake. You know, it's funny. Just funny for me.
Okay. Grace.
Yeah, I think it's so. I think this. I'm still mulling over this question. I think this is so interesting to think about. I mean, throughout this conversation, I was also thinking about Police Story and like the Jackie Chan, I guess, sort of martial arts spectacle that we see in Police Story versus here, which seems a lot more, I don't know, straightforward, I guess, in terms of like the combat and everything. But I do think that what is interesting in the Roundup 2, that I found at least, was how much emphasis was placed on the martial arts-esque action. We do see a lot of fighting scenes, almost as if it was an homage to like older police crime movies. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but I think that contributes to the general spectacle of the film and shifting the focus away from like, oh, isn't this policeman actually very like cruel and intimidating, and making it more like, look, this is so entertaining to watch. Like, look at all these things and look at how clever the police are fighting these people with these big machetes and these guns and everything else.
No.
Tom?
No, I mean, I think it was very refreshing to watch for me, and I think it's because the two ways that it succeeds is in its tone and in its execution. Because there's nothing. I mean, we were speaking very briefly before recording how there's nothing particularly deep going on. There's not too much to look into here beyond the surface narrative, but it's the way that it's executed. Like the action scenes are fantastic. In my opinion, the hallway fight in particular between Kang and the Korean mercenaries is wonderful, the way that it's executed. And the balance between being a thriller but also a comedy really works for me, where I find a lot of Western blockbusters that are equally relaxed in terms of what they're trying to go for as a movie will kind of undercut the seriousness of what's going on in the plot with a throwaway line that's supposed to be funny, but it really kind of sucks the tension out of what's happening in the plot. Whereas here, the comedy was complementing the dramatic aspects of it and the sort of ticking clock aspects of it, especially when it comes to the ransom exchange sequence later in the film. I just thought the way that was all edited together was wonderful. But there are still small chunks of humor in there that don't take away from the urgency of what's happening.
And okay, I guess this question is more for the girls, but okay, after finishing the movie, okay, my general opinion of it is that it's like a guy's flick, like it's directed to men, like almost exclusive. There are almost no women there, there is nothing, it's just men beating each other. Like this is the thing that happens in the movie for the most. So what do you think about that, Grace?
I think that's so funny because that's how I felt when I finished the movie. I've been recently rewatching the Ring series, and like there's like a female investigative journalist who's at the forefront of the whole franchise, and I was just like struck by, I guess, the lack of women in this film. I was like, oh my goodness, especially with all of the talk that's going on in Korea right now, with like anti-feminism or with feminism, I suppose, and the current, I don't know, presidential politics where like it's been very, I guess, discriminatory, like on a gender-based level. So I think that is something that I found sorely lacking, but also interesting to find that so many people found this movie so appealing.
Adriana?
Well, yes, I said the same earlier. That there are no women, but I have to say that I watching the movies, I didn't actually realize that, because it's the story. There is such I don't know. It doesn't allow any inclusion, any female inclusion. And maybe just at the end when there is the exchange of ransom with the wife, it just dawned me that that was the first woman of the film. But again, I didn't really mind watching it. Then, if I sit down and I think, there was no inclusion, it would have been nice to see a bit more. But watching the movies, it didn't really not at any point say, oh, but where are the women? But maybe I'm a bit particular in this. I don't know.
I think it really depends what you're looking to get out of a film in general. Do you know what I mean? Like you're totally looking for certain aspects of things that you expect or you like or you enjoy in a movie. I mean, like honestly, most of my favorite action figures in movies are probably women when it comes down to the female actresses. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like Meiko Kaji. I've just come off the back of watching a bunch of Angela Mao kung fu flicks. You know what I mean? But it's not because it's a female action film. It's just because it's a good action film. It just happens to have a female lead. But then again, this is coming from me, where I'm not looking for either a female or male lead going into it. I just want the film to be executed well, because coming back to just how this is quite a relaxed movie in terms of what it's trying to say in the narrative. If this was the exact same movie, but say with 4 more major female characters, but the action and tone of the film had been executed poorly, it wouldn't work for me, because it's got nothing to do with the characterization in this film. It's more to do with the filmmaking elements of it. If the focus was more on a sort of socially driven plot that's trying to have some kind of commentary on current goings on, then that would be more important. But I just think because it's not the intention of the movie, it doesn't distract too much, at least not for me.
Also, another thing, I think that sometimes inclusion for the sake of inclusion leads to bad characters, like, I don't know, the nagging wife, or, you know, things like that. And so I'd rather have none of those characters than you know, it would have been nice to have a good female character, but also this film is the sequel of another film. You know, the team was all male team in the first film, so it would have been difficult to maybe insert another, you know, someone in the team or the baddies, but then someone would have said, oh, the woman, the baddies was a woman, you know.
No, I totally agree. But I also think, because one of my complaints, kind of minor complaints coming out of the movie, was that Detective Ma doesn't really face any obstacles in the film. Like, I really would have liked every sort of confrontation he gets into, he just seems to absolutely breeze through, which kind of becomes comical towards the end. But just to the point that you just mentioned, Adriana, like, had they chucked in a damsel in distress girlfriend character for him to come and save, or that was a hostage, that wouldn't really have done anything for the story either. You know, it's like, you don't just want to tag it on for the sake of it. So for as much as I could have done with him having more sort of personal conflict or struggles in the film, I wouldn't have liked anything to have been tacked on just to tick a box.
Well, again, considering the box office success of the film, I guess people still want to watch this kind of films, particularly now. It's like, okay, sometimes it's cool, I guess, to just have fun with the film and not overthink it. Just, you know, pass the time in entertaining fashion or something. So I guess, yeah, that's one of the purposes of cinema also. But, okay, yeah. And so, as you mentioned, Tom, you have a protagonist who is, okay, as we said before, that he's kind of brutal, a policeman who has like the authority and he uses it however he wants, and he's stronger than everyone. So no opponent for him like to say something to him or do something to him, let's say. But the film still manages to be like really entertaining and captivating, and I think this is due to Ma Dong-seok's acting, which for me, I cannot really explain it because the guy has no facial expressions or anything. He doesn't, I don't know, you can say that it's a very strange kind of acting, but it works like really greatly. So yeah, what do you think about his acting, Grace?
I think so much of his acting comes down to his body. Like, I can't say so much about body language, but just like how he is built, looks almost like a superhero-ish sort of character. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think a lot of it comes down to just what he looks like and the sort of aura he possesses.
Yeah, his physical presence that's all very often, and also in other films where he's sort of cast a bit against the character, like he play characters that are a bit the opposite. It's got like a very funny comedy effect. Like, for example, I don't know, there is a film called Startup where he play the usual character, the gangster in pristine white shirt and black jacket, you know, big head of a mafia gang, but he's fed up with that, and you just wanna sing karaoke, wear pink jumpers, and be camp, and yeah, and it's just very funny because of the contrast with this physique, and also in Familyhood, he play like the stylist of a family, the famous actress. It's quite funny because he doesn't do anything, just himself. It's just funny that that character is the stylist of this famous actress. And so, yeah, also something that I noticed it made me a bit smile is that, you recognize him from behind now because it's got such a way to walk with this jacket thrown on his shoulder. And it's the way that you see it at the beginning of the film arriving from behind. And then at the end of the film, he leaves with this jacket going. And he reminds me a bit of Takeshi Kitano. That's got the same kind of, not the same way of walking, but the same way that he established his character with this funny walking, and you can recognize it just from the silhouette.
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on from that, because I completely agree, I wouldn't underestimate his ability to put in a good physical performance. And outside of the fight scenes and stuff, like, he is very much a presence. And yes, it does come down to his size, but it's also just kind of in the way that he carries himself in a scene. He manages to make himself look very imposing. I would liken him, at least in this film, to an Arnold Schwarzenegger or a Sylvester Stallone, just in terms of being this unstoppable sort of muscle man who you never really feel like they're going to be beaten physically. I mean, in terms of just talking about some opposition that he might have come up against, I was thinking perhaps it might be that he gets outwitted at some point, because, it was like Adriana said earlier, it's one punch and someone goes flying across a room. It's ridiculous. However, I would say that he's very charismatic, because unlike Arnold Schwarzenegger, in some cases, at least in his early films, he's not this kind of stony-faced blank slate, like he's very charming and he's very kind of calming almost. He just comes across as a very relaxed, like nonchalant sort of figure. Everything he does is with a little bit of like a sigh and just like, we'll just, okay, we'll go. It just comes across as very effortless, which at some points is a little too much, because you'd like him to feel a little bit more under pressure, just for the urgency of the scene. But in other ways, it's very entertaining, and it makes him extremely likable. You can't help but, like we were talking about earlier, even when he is torturing this poor bloke pretty much to get something out of him, even just the way he goes about that, it's almost very reassuring and oddly so. But I would totally put that down to just his charisma as a performer, as well as his physical presence.
I guess what we are all describing right now, it's the concept of charisma. I guess it's something, either you have it or not. I guess it's not, I don't know. I think he had it from the beginning. Even his early movies, you could see that there was something about him. So yeah.
You would love for him to just give you a cuddle. Do you know what I mean? He's huge, but also just so calming. It's like he beat the crap out of someone in the movie and then just come over, give one of his underlings a cuddle, all going to be fine.
I just wouldn't want him to be my enemy, man. And
definitely
everything else would work out.
Just to say very briefly, and I don't know if we'll mention it again, I would like to say that Sukoo Son as Kang is wonderful as the villain. If we're talking about the antithesis of the hero, he is just vicious and repulsive in some scenes, and I do think that comes down to the performance.
Grace, about Son Soku?
So yeah, I thought that I also think that he was brilliant. I think it was interesting that he mirrored Ma Dong-seok a lot, and that like he was supposed to be also like this very nonchalant character, also very stony faced, supposed to be like this criminal with a very nondescript attitude. But then that facade breaks when he realizes that everything is falling apart, and he like might not have an escape plan anymore. And he does like break character too with his violent outbursts. So I think that sort of character foils with Ma Dong-seok's continuous and consistent sort of character where he is always calm, I think, as Tom says. And I think for Adriana, like always plays himself and is authentic to himself. So yeah.
Adriana?
Well, yeah, I thought it was a great villain, and it replaced very well the one of the first film. There was another vicious one, and I thought he was great. His facial expression really got me, because he had he can go from looking quite sweet to a complete psycho in a second, and he's a psycho in the film, because even when. Because it's not just a criminal wanting money. It's just a psycho, almost borderline a serial killer, because he kills the kidnapped people with no reason, and that's why as Grace was pointing out, when he realized the plan is not going like he wanted, it sort of crumbled, but he just do things that make no sense, like going back to Korea, chasing just for the sake of for revenge, or for rage, or for because it's a psycho. Didn't make any sense of that move. In a way, because it made it more not just for the money, but made it more vulnerable. He was great, the actor. Yeah.
And I also think the fact that he's so vicious, like a cold-blooded killer, essentially, it also works well for the protagonist, because it makes the protagonist seem better no matter what he does. The villain is really worse than him. It's okay. He beats people, the other one kills them. So it's like, okay, I guess it works in that way too.
Yeah, he beats people, but it's just to catch the mad one. So it's good in a way. It looks good.
Okay, and if we were to speak about individual scenes, which is the one that made the most impression to you, Tom?
I mean, I think it's rather an extended sequence. It is the ransom scene, just the initial car, not really chase, but just sort of intense following, if you like, leading into the eventual like fist fight in the parking lot of a shopping center. But just the action and the build up to it, and the way that the different narrative threads are edited together in that sequence was really, really engaging for me.
Grace?
I think it's so funny that you call the car chase an intense following, because I think just how much time we saw of just cars going around and people driving.
Yeah.
My friend and I, when we were watching it together, they were like, oh, what are we watching? We're just watching people go around in cars. So I think even though that was not the main point of the film at all, I think that really made an impression on me, and just like how much time we spent within these vehicles.
Okay. Adriana?
Well, I agree with them, but also I really enjoyed two scenes. One is the fight in the flat. Is very well choreographed, very well planned, and it's also because in this sort of labyrinthine space, small space, and talking about small space, even the final beat up in the bus is quite impressive. I like the fact the way it's handled. He goes in the bus and asks everybody to leave with that reassuring face that we were talking earlier, and then beat him like a pulp. To a pulp.
Yeah.
And again, it's a good fight, because he's in a small bit, like Train to Busan, kind of small, narrow.
That fight actually in particular reminded me of the finale of The Villainess.
Yeah.
Just very similar kind of choreography in small space with the spinning camera.
I thought that the beginning of that scene, which is just the villain with the other fighting the other villains, reminded me of Old Boy, the scene in the corridor that is just one man, I guess.
Yeah,
Scores of enemies with knives.
That too.
Yeah, and it's all, for me, this sequence is my favorite, just the one Adriana mentioned, also because they managed to even have some comedy in there for the other cop that he tries to shoot the gun, but he fails consecutively. And I think it's very difficult to include humor in a scene that it's so brutal. There's so much murder and people getting stabbed and shot there, but still to make something funny, I think it's a testament to the quality of the direction in the film. Yeah, well, yeah, I guess anything else you would like to add, Tom?
Just that I feel like far too often nowadays you can say like, oh, it's a good action film, you just switch your brain off and go with it and you don't have to think about it. And I hate that because you want to be engaged with what you're watching. And I found this really refreshing just because it is just a fun sort of surface level action film, but it's executed so well, and the balance between action, comedy, the thriller elements of it, performances, even like some of the sound design and stuff on a technical level, like the punches feel so weighty, like you really feel like with the sounds of him kind of impacting with someone's face. I just thought it's a bit of fun, but it's a bit of fun that you'll find very engrossing and will keep your attention if you want it to.
Well, it's a flick, but it's not exactly a film that you watch and then forget in like 24 hours. I think it stays with you for a bit. Grace, anything else you would like to add for the film?
Yeah, I just feel like this is very much a film. I feel like this film really describes like where the Korean film industry is at the moment, with just like its homages, I think, as you said, to like Old Boy, to other gangster cop films where they all eat jjajangmyeon together and you're like, they're all eating baki noodles. It's like, that's the time. But also, I guess, thinking about its future and thinking about like Escape from Mogadishu, like thinking about Korean productions abroad and thinking about Korean films like being outside of Korea, and thinking about Korean diaspora more generally speaking. So I think it's a really interesting film at a crossroads of seeing where we will end up next in the future.
Adriana?
No, I haven't got much to add. I mean, I agree with Tom. It's a very well executed action movie, and I am a big fan of film genre, so I'm always happy when there is a genre movie that is well done and goes against the belief that they're just a flick or popcorn or. I mean, it is a popcorn, but it's well done and good, top in his category. So.
Yeah,
I think just to follow on from that, just very briefly, there are so many points in the movie where you can think of ways where they could have taken the easy way out in terms of executing certain sequences, but I feel like they went the extra mile to make something quality.
Yeah, and I think as a whole thing, it's like a testament to the quality of Korean film right now. I mean, you see how the level of production value, cinematography, editing is top notch. The protagonist is really great, and also I think the film benefits by the fact that Koreans, unlike the US, which also shoots a lot of this kind of movies, are not bound by political correctness that much. I'm not sure if you could shoot a film as violent as that right now in the US. I'm not sure. So yeah.
They producing a third one apparently. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's confirmed. But
there will be like 10, I'm sure of it. Okay. Okay. Ma Dong-seok is already 51 years old, but I see him acting in the 60s. I don't think his body will be ruined anytime soon. So yeah. Okay, I guess that's it. This was ASEAN Movie Pulse Talks One and More, and see you soon, probably next week. from all of us. Bye.